Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid.
Reid, today we have Adam on, Adam Walters, who I think the audience is now familiar with, but he heads up our paid media department. Because it must have been 2 weeks ago or something, but we were in some sort of meeting and he just got super passionate about Apple's iOS 14 update and the untold, I guess, conspiracy theory that he has on on why they're doing this change. So we thought, let's get him on the mic and just see what he comes up with. But yeah, did it live up to everything you expected?
It did, and then some, because of the tinfoil hat. So, I thought that was an incredible, nice surprise touch or whatever that caught me off guard, which is true to Adam. He's, totally got the deadpan humor. You sometimes better listen carefully or you'll miss a dig at yourself or a dig at something. He's just that guy. And he's probably the only person at Digible that has a deeper voice than me. Not that that's saying a whole lot, but you always bring it up. 80% of our company is probably female. So that, it's only, only a handful, but it just occurred to me when he started talking.
Yeah, he has you both have better radio voices than I do. That's for sure. I would still pick you at first place for the radio voice. At least in this organization, Robert from Better Bot has you beat. There, I don't know that you could ever compare.
Yeah, he runs circles around me. He sounds like he did the recording and Stand By Me, like when he did his little shtick, for like the station in Florida. There's the guy that is in the pie eating contest. It's the radio personality. I was like, I didn't place it right away, but now I'm like, Robert, that's who you sound like.
Mm-hmm. I always say Leo Laporte, who's a famous tech journalist.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, you nailed it there too, because I think I searched that after you said that.
All right. Well, anything else on your mind, or do we let people get straight into Adam's theory?
No, let's let him dive right in.
All right, cool. Well, I hope you guys enjoy this off the cuff, episode with Adam about how Apple plans to take over the ad tech space. We're just laughing because Reid was eating pretzels instead of nachos this time, and he sounded like a squirrel, but he's going to try to hold himself in check for the rest of this recording. All right, Adam, you're here with us to talk about Apple. Well, I shouldn't say Apple conspiracy theories, but you have a conspiracy theory related to ad tech and what you think. I think you would say Apple is initiating your theory. So we thought it'd be fun to put you on tinfoil hat and hear what, because you seemed pretty fired up about. Oh, you even brought your tinfoil hat. That's more prep than anybody's ever done for the podcast.
Oh, dude, where's your drop, David?
Oh, hang on. Well, which drop do you want? I got a new one for you.
I don't know what. I would have done the symbols for that. Kudos to Adam.
Well, awesome. Keep your hat on, Adam.
I don't know if I'll be able to take myself seriously. I won't be able to look at myself in the podcast window, but ready to go.
Yeah. Well, this is an incentive for those to see his makeshift tinfoil hat on video if they go to YouTube.
I should just wear those every Monday in Roundup. It would help explain a lot,
Yeah, well, we'd probably hold people's attention a little bit more if we did dress up on Roundups. All right, Adam. Well, what the heck? What is this new theory? How long has this been brewing? What are we talking about?
Apple has been communicating their iOS 14 update, which is a lot of stuff around privacy and that kind of stuff. But what the big impact it's having on advertisers, primarily Facebook, but to some extent Google and probably others as well, is it makes them less able to target as efficiently if people opt into this, this app can't track my activity on said device. So, Apple's coming at this from obviously like an ethical standpoint and privacy and all of that stuff, which I'll say I agree with to some extent, but not fully. I think the real reason behind this is for Apple to now enter into the ad space of digital advertising. So check the numbers here before I was just putting on my tinfoil hat. But so of Apple's, let's say last year they did about 275 billion in revenue. Only about 2 billion of that is from their Apple Ads source, which is very small. So the rest of that is, you think Apple, you think hardware, which has a lot of headaches with it, right? There's supply chain and a lot of products are produced overseas. Like we just saw with COVID, there's a lot of variables that can go into that are out of your control that can really impact your bottom line. Whereas digital, stuff like Google, there's not a lot of overhead. They don't have to, there's privacy laws and all that stuff that's not coming into play, but they don't have to manufacture search engines or anything like that. So I think this is Apple's way of getting in there. And where Apple has the biggest, I'll say, well, where they have the biggest force obviously is with products, right? I think the iPhone has like 65% of the market share, and same with like their Apple OS operating system. So they control kind of where you're using these products like Google and Facebook. So therefore they can now say, hey, on our devices, we're going to limit these products and make ours, potentially better. So it's still up in the air for me on how Apple Ads is going to enter into that space, whether it's, they're not going to surpass Google for search engines or, Facebook and Instagram. But even if they captured, I think Forbes was, estimating the 2021 impairment on Google and Facebook at about 10% of their ads revenue. So if you took 10% of Google's ad revenue, which last year was $147 billion, that's still a lot more than just doubling your current $2 billion ads revenue. So even if they just get a tiny sliver of that, it's a big impact on their bottom line without having to deal with the hardware and the overhead costs that come with manufacturing. But that is mine.
So you're totally right. Yeah, I love. Did you guys
Nope.
lose me?
I
Can
can
you still
still
hear
hear
me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I didn't see my audio going. So to help clarify, Apple today does very little Apple Ads. How do people experience Apple Ads
So right
today?
now it's primarily in like the App Store, or if you're using like a native Apple app like Stocks or something like that. So it's not really something people use a lot, right? They don't have their own search engine on there unless maybe you're searching on your device and it gives you some suggestions, right? If you just use like the default, Siri search kind of thing. So there's not a ton of, exposure to that stuff really, unless you're in the App Store, probably the majority of it, I would guess.
So mostly just app to promote your App Store
Yep.
listings, but otherwise not too sophisticated. Yeah, and then Facebook has felt this too because obviously Apple has been pushing back against Facebook and saying like, they're the ones complaining about like this data iOS 14 thing. And Facebook is one of the reasons Facebook has invested so heavily into Oculus because they feel like they missed the boat on a Facebook phone. And if you control the hardware, you effectively control the market, right? And so to your point, it's kind of crazy that Apple hasn't done its own search engine, at this point, or, made it a more relevant part of their business. And just for that, I remember Facebook had recently announced that they had hired 10,000 people to work on their Oculus like VR device, which is significant. And for more context, go ahead, Reid.
Sorry to interrupt, but that just seems like a flawed idea about controlling the hardware. Then you control the market, at least when it comes to advertising. Because think about it, you have Microsoft, right, and PCs, and then you have Apple, but who's controlling it? It's Google, and Facebook. Neither one of them have the hardware.
But
Google does with Android.
Well, yeah, I mean they have Droid, but it's not. That hasn't. I mean, maybe it's helped. All I'm saying is that they were able to monopolize, search, without the hardware, and Facebook's also had that kind of success without the hardware. Sorry, I just, to me that.
No, I think
ahead,
if it's going to come down to people are going to have to decide because you're right in that, Google controls like, what they control. But if Apple and PC said, hey, guess what? We're going to disable Google on all of our devices. You can only use Google on a Chromebook. How many people would say this Chromebook is worth it for me to still use Google? First, people are going to say, you know what, whatever. I love my MacBook Pro. I'm just going to stick with this and use Bing or something like that. So
this is where I can't wait to see where the legislation, falls. Like on this whole deal, is all these antitrust suits are flaring up. Because if Apple made a power move like this that you're describing, wouldn't they be squarely like in the crossfires of some type of antitrust suit? Sorry, David, go ahead. I'm let you get
No,
back
you're
up
right.
here.
I think that's part of the thing. So up until now, Apple has promoted privacy, but they haven't really been heavy into it like they are now that now Facebook's worried about their business. Now, I will say there's a contradiction here because for Apple to get into China, they had to agree for a Chinese-run organization to host the servers. So even though Apple in the U.S. is promoting privacy, effectively the Chinese government can see everything that's going on Apple devices in China. And 2/3 of Apple's revenue come from out of the US. So we think of Apple being super heavy in the US, but globally that's where 2/3 of their revenue come from. So yes, they have one foot in the privacy bucket, and with their foot in there, they're really going to put a squeeze on Facebook, because the reason Facebook had done so well without devices, one is they were allowed to get data from all over the internet, kind of uncensored. They kind of like beat the legislation on this. But now that legislation is getting more centric around user privacy, GDPR, and all this other stuff, it's going to be harder for someone to come in and basically challenge a Facebook at this point, unless you are you're basically the piping. So that's what I meant by owning the device. Like if you're the device and you decide to turn off Google, turn off Facebook or whatever, now like what can they do? Because nobody's going to say, well, I don't think a lot of people would say, but if Apple tried to kick Facebook off all of a sudden the iPhone, do you think a lot of people would just like switch off, like leave Apple and go get an Android so they could go get their Facebook? I don't think they have that kind of draw, right? So this is where it's almost like the industry self-regulating in some ways. But to your point, Reid, like is the more they self-regulate, the more they risk sort of being an antitrust or anti-trade sort of like situation happening to them.
Exactly. The more guys like Adam that get on podcasts with this kind of reach, like Digible dudes, the more that they're going to be exposed.
I'm worried Apple's going to come after me. I should have done my like blurred face and like had the voice encryption going.
Change the voice.
Well, we're not Apple partners yet, Adam. So but when the day comes, that their app platform takes off,
exactly.
You could end up being a problem for us.
You know what is crazy about this though is Adam mentioned 2 billion of the 240 billion, but on a previous episode we had talked about Amazon's ad growth, and it's their fastest growing business line that has any significance. And the stat I have is like in Q1 they did 77% year over year growth, bringing their total ad sales to $7 billion for the quarter. So they're doing like almost 30 billion a year. If they keep that growth rate up, they'll be near 40 billion a year by the end of this year. And that just smokes Apple. And back to your point, Adam, like you would think that like Apple should be crushing the ad market. I mean, 2 billion is still a lot of money, but respectively, I feel like Apple should be ahead of Amazon when it comes to ad sales.
I mean, Facebook Q1 was up 46% year over year. I think with just their ads revenue, I think it was like $25 billion or something just in Q1 of this year. So I think Apple's just seeing everyone else grow.
The question is can you have your cake and eat it too? Because part of why people have been, the user experience on an Apple device, right? It's like that would change dramatically if they started to, get aggressive with an advertising move versus where it sits today. And everybody knows the history of Facebook too, obviously, and how they built their business. So the question's always about timing, and that's what's been fascinating with Amazon. It's like how did this take this long, and how much will it jeopardize or compromise the experience? Because I can say already, I'm not. I mean, we're in this game, but I'm starting to get irritated by the advertising on Amazon. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop shopping there, but you guys get it, right? It's like there's some type of balancing act here, which I think is interesting for Google now, and obviously the changes they're trying to make, and how that will affect, their ad revenue versus their actual just audience, the usage that they get. And that's hard to do because they're all like cruise liners, right? They're not motorboats, but David shared, of course, some of the things that are pretty cool that Facebook does to test things out. But I'm curious, like, how Apple is, staging through this, I guess. I don't know how much you've read on that, Adam, as far as how
kind of up in the air.
testing
I think it really depends on if they're, are they going to try to make a competing, like they have, Apple Maps competes with Google Maps. Are they going to try to, relaunch like Safari again as like its own search engine? Are they going to try to do like, some sort of social media app? Apple's never really tested that out from what I know in terms of like a Facebook or anything else. I know like Google tried it like Google Plus and that flopped, but we'll see if Apple comes up with something like that. I think it depends on where they're going to go after first, kind of thing. Like are they going to, I don't know, gut or whatever would say they're going to try to do something with Safari and just make it the default search engine on Apple and see if anyone changes or what that's like, but who knows?
Well, is this better for the end user is maybe a better question that I could pose back to you guys. But Dave and I have talked about these antitrust suits and the big movement that's happening with tech right now. And, it doesn't, for me, like having them fighting, I guess, over like, dominance with like any sector, right? Their e-commerce, or whether it's, search advertising or other types of advertising, or whether it's the hardware, everybody's like, we got to regulate these guys so that there isn't a monopoly. But then it becomes the problem for the end user of trying to navigate that mess when it's all kind of split up. So not to talk out of both sides of my mouth, but I'm curious how you guys feel about that. And we could make the comparison, and maybe we should, since, to our own industry, but where you have the real pages, you have the Yardies, and if they were playing this game, which in many ways they do, how that affects our end user, like the marketer, it just drives them nuts, and so, yeah, I don't know how you guys think about that, but is it better for this to be deregulated or regulated?
I honestly don't know. I think it depends on like just what those kind of like regulations come down as. I mean, it reminds me a little bit to some extent when like Netflix came out and cable companies were, who were the ones providing the Wi-Fi were talking about like throttling down the broadband for Netflix or other streaming services and stuff like that, and like legislation got involved. So it's a little bit like that, but I think it depends. I think end users are going to want just the most like streamlined approach, and that's where I think Apple has the advantage. If you have all Apple devices, if you pick up your MacBook, your iPad, Apple TV, iPhone, and it's very streamlined, and you can hand off things from one device to the other, it makes a very easy user experience.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, go ahead.
I don't know if we like skipped past this, but Adam, because of the privacy, your theory, just to be clear, and maybe you can go more in depth here, is that we have all these other tech companies like Google with Flock, FLOC, and Trade Desk is doing something, and I don't even remember all the different acronyms for all these different things. But basically, it's like if on Apple device you can no longer get user data or audience data back. Now it's kind of like the thought is it's a black hole. Now you can say like I want to target people on an iPhone, but that's almost as deep as you could get based on the restrictions that they're doing. And as you're saying that that's roughly, let's say, half or somewhere like 60% of mobile traffic typically, which means it's probably a third of all web traffic for apartments. So your thought is they do privacy that way, but would they then come out with their own standard, if you would, like for like that they feel is privacy centric or enough that like they can start providing some sort of audience data back for those that have agreed not to share it with the apps?
Possibly. I mean, I guess they could sell the data, and that would be how they kind of get at some of that revenue. If I thought they were doing this from a pure like privacy, ethical standpoint, then I'd say maybe, but I think this is really just the play for them to snag some revenue from the other players. But I think one of the things that's going to, and this isn't my own creation, just reading up on some of these things, that there could be this could, almost like shoot themselves in the foot. Yes, they're making advertising on Facebook, potentially Google, less efficient, but if they don't provide a substitute that's more efficient, people are still just going to be like, well, darn, it's 10% less efficient on Facebook. Now I just got to spend 10% more on these platforms because there's nowhere else for me to spend this money. So I still need to hit this, sales goal or whatever it is. So it could end up just people spending more on these platforms because they are less efficient in a way, unless there's a more efficient substitute for it.
So the revenue that you're talking about that they would be stealing away would be they'd either have to come out with a new ad platform that allowed you to run stuff like Microsoft with Bing or whatever it is these days, or they would start selling the data segments similar to like whatever.
Blue Kai.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was gonna say like LiveRamp or whatever, but yeah.
Like,
so, but then you'd port it into whatever
like
platform.
on DV360, right? You can buy like private audience or third-party audiences that are like an extra $1 CPM or something like that. So they could easily have something like that. That's just like, hey, Apple provides this. People they think are interested in buying apartments, and it's an extra $1.50 CPM on top of whatever. Or, I don't know if they import it to Google or how that works with the cost per click model, but I'm sure there's ways for it to work.
Well, it's a super interesting cascading effect, Reid. I don't know if you're thinking about that, but if you are a company that has data on your audience, so let's say that I don't know how many iPhone users have the ESPN app, but once you log into that app, you obviously give a lot of your data away, your profile information, your interest in sports. So does that allow folks like Disney, actually, unintended consequence, to start selling their audience data and say, hey, now you can take this to target better on iPhone or whatever else because someone has to log into my system?
Yeah, it should. And this whole thing about, well, I guess the data privacy part of this, I really don't know. I mean, clearly there's a huge gap in awareness or education about this. If you talk to the layman's, on the street and just say, how much do you share your data? How much do you know about data sharing and all this? And I think for the average Joe, they just, they're like, yeah, it's scary. The government has so much information on me, but they don't really know what they're saying yes to or no to. And so that's kind of dangerous, right? Where the big middle, like the driving force here is really totally undereducated. And I bring that up as a little preamble to the fact that, David's heard me reference this before. I don't think I've shared it with you, Adam, but years ago, I read an article, I think it was in the Washington Journal or Washington Post, but they were talking about cookies, and they were like, people don't understand, if you did away with cookies, and this was years and years ago, it would be a horrible experience, a horrible online experience. And, so would people favor that, like basically taking us back to like the late 1990s? Or would you prefer to have relevant content? Because it's not just advertising. Yeah. That's something else people don't fully grasp, is the sophistication now of what we see, not just ads, but actual content, is entirely based on having your data. And if you close that down, again, the average Joe doesn't understand any of this really, but it's like, it could be a nightmare. And then how does that affect, the audience game? Like who wins and who loses there? So I don't know how what you do about it, because I certainly sympathize, and I think there should be more, I'll say, regulation or governance around data, digital, what's being shared. But I also fear what the outcome of all this is going to be if they go too far with it.
No, absolutely. I think it's, even when it comes to like targeted ads, like I've been looking for a standing desk, and so I get hit with different companies that provide standing desks and whatever. And to some extent, it's nice because you can kind of like shop around the competitors, see who offers what without having to do a ton of digging, versus if it's just the Wild West and you're getting hit with ads for who knows what, for like, I don't know, a diner in San Antonio, and you're like, why am I getting hit with this ad? It's not anywhere relevant to me. And now I just have so much spam everywhere I go online that I just have to click out of. So I think, yeah, there's definitely the balance.
The other side of that the other side of that coin, though, that I thought is also interesting, is if you are giving up too much data, that David's used this term a couple of times, that you create that echo chamber, but that and the way it was positioned in this article years ago is that it's a house of mirrors now. Is everything is as I like to say, self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, but you no longer are discovering the world in any kind of impartial manner. Everything is extremely biased based on the data that you've provided. So how the hell do you find the middle ground between that, which is a terrible experience now, digital experience, versus one that is too custom and too personalized?
No, that's a very good point about like the middle ground point, because it is a lot of the, whatever it is, confirmation bias or affirmation bias, where you just constantly see things that back up, your own opinions or whatever, but it's the experience you like. So that's why I think advertisers are going to continue to go down it. If they kept showing you stuff that, I don't know, made you scrunch your nose at it or whatever, you'd probably be less likely to revisit that platform. So it's tough.
Yeah, and it's not right now. It seems mostly, David, I'll let you, because you know better than probably, well, Adam might be able to go toe to toe with you on some of this as far as the latest, but that you can make choices about what you share and what you don't. I feel like every time that comes up, again, speaking from an end user, it's, do you want to share your location or not? Yes or no? Do you want to share your data? Yes or no? So I'm sure there's sites, but again, back to the education, it's less than 1% that would know about these, where you can be more custom, right? I'm okay sharing this, but I'm not okay sharing that. And think of the compliance issues you'd have, like trying to get the general public, to go through that. So then you're left with, are you in or are you out? And that doesn't allow for the middle ground I'm talking about. That's what I worry about. Is it's very black and white right now. Is that fair to say, David?
Well, I do think it could be really interesting if Apple cared so much about this, that they would do similar to what they do with like kids, like in screen time, how you can set up rules and permissions around like how much someone can use a device. If you could do the same thing, like when you fire up your Apple phone for the first time, it's like, hey, let's personalize a few things. Do you will have a better experience on the web if you're willing to share these things. Do you want to default turn that on or off, or what kind of profile are you willing to share? I don't think it'll be terrible, Reid, about going back to the 90s. I just think marketers will have to be more sophisticated about it, about how they target. If Apple's thing goes through and they don't like do a great user experience about in education, well, two things. One, I think different platforms like a Facebook, when you join, will basically have if you're on your iPhone, will probably have to do similar to what you do with email campaigns. Try to get everybody to sign up for your newsletter, right? And it's like, why sign up for my newsletter? Why? It's like you get these benefits, right? If you're Facebook, then I feel like you're constantly going to be trying to get people kind of like the incomplete LinkedIn profile. It's like, oh, this user is only willing to share 75% of their stuff. And then like if I'm Facebook, when you enter my app, I would say, hey, you know what? I could really do this better if you were willing to share this. Are you willing to reconsider it? So I think it's going to be like the newsletter side like that. But let's pretend that everybody on iPhone decides, I don't want to share my stuff. Then marketers are just going to have to get better with like going back to the tools of old with like IP targeting, right? So it's like, well, I have your information if you have a laptop and you are on your home Wi-Fi. And now if I see an iPhone hit that same IP address, I'm going to make these assumptions about what it is. So I don't think it'll be like a total back to the 90s. I just think like IP targeting and location targeting and those other kinds of identifiers will become like will come back in vogue.
Those are not, well, yeah, you're probably right. Those actually don't make me feel like we're going back to the 90s, but it does make me feel like we're going back 15 years when IP targeting first kind of hit the forefront. The irony, right, is what you were saying is like they're going to need to become more sophisticated, but with less data. That's the conflict, is like you're going to need to be smarter and more sophisticated, but you're not going to have, half the tools that you had before. This makes me think, funny enough, and who would have been great for this podcast, right?
Not Adam. If we kicked him off, is what you're saying.
Well, of course, Adam gets a seat just for having the tinfoil hat. Like, but Manny would have been great. Of course, we would have been probably ranting for another 3 hours. But what I was going to say is, you mentioned IP. Does this not then put some power or opportunity back in the hands of publishers, like on direct buys? So, back to us at the Post, but it's like we were hearing all the time. And for me, I was hearing it back in Austin, but it's like, I can buy right around you guys. I can buy you direct or right around you guys all programmatically. And so huge chunks of digital money, not mind you the legacy print or TV or radio, but huge digital chunks were going out the door because of the abilities, that the new piping was offering up. But you take away some of this stuff, and then it's like, okay, I need to start buying. David, you mentioned assumptions, but who typically goes to the Post or goes to CNN or whatever? And suddenly, you're getting a bunch of direct site buys again because they're having to buy the way they used to years ago. Super interesting to see how this will all play out.
I was thinking earlier about takeovers. Just hitting what you're saying. It's like I just think you might have brands go back to that, and then those folks like the El Toros of the world, they get a second life in them, right? So it's like if I'm El Toro, famous for IP targeting, then as you said, like over the last 15 years, it's kind of started to dwindle on the effectiveness. All of a sudden, it's like now I've got a great sales pitch. I'm pumped again.
Yeah.
So
it's like Pulp Fiction for John Travolta. Like we're back.
Yeah. I wanted to make a joke there about his Battlefield Earth movie. Man, I feel like that's what took him back the other way. Well, I will say like one other outside factor of this is like Apple these days is being hit with like so many other opportunities that I think it's a great theory. That's why I was excited to have Adam on, but they have other initiatives where it's like, well, people are talking about, well, they should get into cars, or they should build their own search engine, or they should acquire DuckDuckGo, and since they're so privacy focused. So I wonder how much of this is also like, I think Tim Cook, who leads Apple now, is like a super smart strategic guy, and but when he, filling Steve Jobs' shoes is no easy task, right? And when after Steve left, and he took the reins, he was smart to not try to replace Steve with himself. He wasn't like, I'm going to play my version of Steve Jobs, right? He just went and did his thing. And I don't know of another CEO that has seen. I think when Steve Jobs left, I think Apple was valued at like 300 billion, and now it's like 1.6 trillion. So it's increased more in value than any other like non-founder CEO that I've studied. So I wonder if this is Tim's version of developing his own legacy. Because in the last year or so, because I had been doing some reading on different Apple books and things just as a study exercise. But Tim had been saying like he doesn't think he'll be there in 10 more years. He'll be doing something else. And so this could be his way. Not that he has a big ego, but just his way of leaving his own legacy, if you will, on, he's like, well, I've already added over $1 trillion in value to this company. I got to leave my mark somehow, besides just like, for bettering the world, if you will. Because he also, I think it was like 5 years ago, came out, as a gay man, which, was a big deal at the time. And so it's like, well, you're in that community, but you haven't like made strides in your own way to, I feel like there's more like almost gay pride attached to when Steve Jobs was there, that like as far as the marketing and the commercials that they did at the time versus what you see under Tim. So anyways, I don't know if he's necessarily thinking of the advertising model. It is more of like, he's like, I got to leave my mark on society. I got to do some good here because I'm a wealthy individual.
Yeah, well, only one person can answer that, which is Tim Cook. But I mean, that's dangerous, right? That legacy or the feeling like being compelled, over the last 10 years to make some big profound change. I'm not saying I don't understand, wouldn't understand it, but, if you've added $1 trillion, and God knows they've got to have all sorts of things like the Gates Foundation that they're doing to make the world a better place. Like the last thing you want to do is screw up your whole legacy by gambling big in the last 10%, 20% of your tenure. And then you actually are pointed at as the person that screwed things up. So got to be careful. I feel like they shouldn't be distracted too much with the ad revenue game. They obviously do extremely well, and cars would be more interesting, similar to Amazon with Whole Foods. Like I'd rather see them go there than try to turn over the Apple Card on the ad platforms.
Well, what's interesting about cars, I mean, it does seem like a big leap to them, but there was talks for a while of them buying Tesla or them buying Peloton. And Tim had said that they would build their own vehicle, soup to nuts. Like, because for a while I think they were looking at like, I don't know, it wasn't like Mitsubishi, but it was like one of those style of brands that they were looking at acquiring because of the supply chain. But Tim Cook, originally, he was the mastermind behind the Apple iPhone supply chain and why they're able to pump out so many hundreds of millions of these things flawlessly and yet with consistency. And so it makes sense to me that if he's running, yeah, the Foxconn debacle, yeah, they really had egg on their face for that. But yeah, I just think like if they're going to do it, it's going to be while he's there, so he can put his mark on it from his supply chain expertise. Because building a car is no easy feat. That was one of Elon Musk's like biggest challenges when he was trying this before he decided to source everything themselves, and they were trying to go through like GM and the others.
Did you happen to catch the DeLorean documentary on Netflix? John DeLorean?
No, but I love the DeLorean story, so I got to check that out.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. But you made me think of that because they were telling him, and he could have been the president of GM at its ultimate power, but ended up clashing with the board and wanted to do his own thing. And so everyone was like, it's literally impossible to start your own car brand or model at this point. Things are way too mature. And sure enough, he made proved him wrong, but he didn't, in the way things ended. So Netflix should give me some credit because now I'm sure all our listeners are like
it'll be on the top 10
edge of their seats.
It'll be in the top 10 in the US here tomorrow.
Trending now.
Yep. Source back to the Digible Dudes podcast.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing is fascinating. I do think it makes sense. If I'm Tim Cook, and even if I want it to be my legacy, I think there is a great play there for the ad space. I will say this, but the one reason or a reason not to would be exactly what Reid said about the antitrust stuff, because the book that I'm finishing up now, it's called Unbound, but it's the new history of Amazon, or the updated history of Amazon. Amazon has declared openly, like, and Google has quotes in the book saying their biggest competitors, Amazon and vice versa. So Amazon and Google see each other as their biggest competitors, whereas a lot of people think Apple is Google's biggest competitor. But if you all of a sudden now go heavy into the ads business or launch your own search engine, now it becomes way harder to argue that fact that like we're not a direct competitor with Google. And so anyways, I think that would be the reason not to. It'd depend on your risk tolerance.
Yeah, I think it's that the antitrust stuff is super unique because Google's getting hit with that a lot right now, and they're like, and that they're one of the monopolies in search. So it's like if Apple were to do this and have their own search engine and then get slapped on the wrist, it would almost be like, well, isn't Google the monopoly? You're preventing me from competing with in this already monopolized market. So it'd be very interesting to see how that's handled by legislation.
Well, yeah, shifting the power from one conglomerate giant to the other. But what was I going to say about? I lost it. That needs its own drop. Like whenever I space out, David. Yeah, you need to put something behind that just to kill the dead air.
Yeah, Adam wanted me to find like a womp womp sound effect.
Yeah.
So I'll see what I can find for like when Reid Space Cadets. What the signature should that should be?
I think.
Well, anything else before we wrap up here? I love it, Adam. I expect your team would be excited to pick up the opportunity for Apple ads. Since it's App Store right now, that doesn't really matter that much for our client base. But anything else to add?
No, I think one thing that'll be interesting, especially for markets like ours, where we have the fair housing, or if you're in the credit industry or anything like that, banking, I think will be like, how do you avoid violating anything like the fair housing stuff without these audiences to help you? Like if I can't target people interested in apartments, how do I target people who are in Denver looking to buy a place in Lohi without crossing any, blurred lines or getting into this gray area of being like, well, the demographic in this market is this race, this income, this age. Do I target those people because I now don't have any other levers to pull besides these? So I think it'll be very interesting for those kind of, mark or industries or verticals that are have those kind of regulations on them.
Well, it did come back to me, and it usually does. So we talked about time to recover. There should be some acronym for us, in particular for me, obviously, David, because you rarely lose your spot. So TTR or something, and then you can start benchmarking, and we'll see how I index over the next couple
We'll
of years.
Put it on our weekly scorecard.
But yeah, exactly. No, I think one question around the antitrust is how much of this is the acquisitions, versus just the sheer, I guess, audience and theoretical control through data that these companies have. Because on a lot of the stuff I've been reading more recently, they seem to be equally, if not more, focused and upset about the fact that Google will just buy anybody they think, potentially could be a threat, or Amazon or whoever, Apple, right? I mean, there's so many acquisitions we've never heard of. I couldn't believe some of the people I've bumped into that were like, yeah, we were bought by Google. And I was like, what? And, they may not have even gotten $1 million in revenue. And so, but the other part of that is that a bad thing when you have a lot of entrepreneurs that are not equipped to scale? They have brought, good technology, a new idea, but it would probably just, fade out, right, if they weren't to sell. So in a weird way, is it better to allow them to continue to acquire and eat up companies because they'll just optimize based on those products and technology because they're no longer a threat, but they'll be more effective in scaling and bringing it to market, which benefits us, the consumer, the end user, versus, precluding or preventing them from doing that. And then you have all these ill-equipped companies and entrepreneurs that have no idea how to really scale a product at a global level.
I think it depends on what they do.
If they bring it to market, though,
yeah,
right?
That's what I was going to say. It depends on what they do with the acquisition. If they buy it just to squash it and hide it in the back, put it in a dark room where no one looks at it anymore, then that's different. But if they are going to,
I think it's an incubator, like it's a different way of getting at it. I mean, so if it's a really good idea and a good technology, why would they put it in the basement? They bought the company. Why not bring it to the masses?
I mean,
it depends on what that technology may or may not do.
Yeah, I think I think you see this,
right?
Maybe not as much.
Be like if CoStar bought Digible.
Yeah, I think it depends on.
Ahead,
I think you see this with like big pharma, right? And a lot more is where like we'll see, and this is, I'll put on my other tinfoil hat for this conspiracy, but you'll see, people who are coming up with more efficient insulin or ways to get around that, and you'll see they get bought up, and then that technology doesn't get further innovated because it would hurt the bottom line. It just gets bought up to basically halt progress than it does more to further it. So I think
this is Adam trying not to talk about weed and
I was talking more about
pharmaceuticals that really
insulin and big pharma
down the.
But even though
I'm going to be keeping a close eye on
the tinfoil hat doesn't help my case.
I'm going to be keeping keep a close eye on Jack and hope that he doesn't get too cynical too fast.
Yeah, better.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, Reid, any final thoughts?
No, I enjoyed it, and we definitely want to keep these coming. The contrarian conspiracy theorist is one of our favorite angles here on the show. So thanks for bringing it forward.
Yeah, of course. Any chance to bust out my tinfoil hat?
I dig it, Adam. Next time. You know what? I will say this: where your Apple advertising could play out is actually with their new premium podcasting like platform service that they recently announced, right? So like similar to Spotify, it drives me freaking bonkers that like I have a premium Spotify subscription, but I get hit with ads on certain podcasts because like mid-roll because Spotify bought Gimlet, for example.
Yep.
Just, man, I can't stand it. So if Apple comes out with something, you would think like in one way it's very against their brand to start throwing mid-roll into podcasts, but in another way, if they own the podcast, like which is what they're talking about, expanding the original content there. That's where I could see that happening. Or on Apple TV with all those shows, right? Like you go to watch whatever Greyhound or whatever the Tom Hanks movie is or whatever show, and it's like now all of a sudden you can start getting crushed with pre-roll.
So funny. Nobody has any sympathy, and myself included, even though we make a living off this stuff, for the advertising or advertiser, because it's like, why or how do you think this content is supported? It's not billionaires that just think it'd be fun. They have to have funding, and in most cases that's coming from some type of commercial support. And yet I'm right there with you, David. I get super annoyed, with pre-rolls, and Miranda's just like, aren't you a little bit of a hip, and that's partly because of our actual business, but you get where I'm coming from. It's like, without sponsors, without advertising, we would have a fraction of the content we have today.
Well, that's totally true. There is, though, like, it depends on the user. Like, some users are willing to pay that premium, right, to skip the pre-roll, and then other users aren't. And with as much as children spend on the internet, that they're the ones that can't exactly say, I want to pay for like premium Nickelodeon or something, right? And so like they're the ones that often get hit with this, which is the constant issue that people complain about. Like, you can't advertise Lucky Charms to kids like that. That's causing the obesity epidemic. But then you have all of these things that are, as you're saying, Reid, supported by that fact. And it's like, but the adults aren't willing to waste their time on commercials. Therefore, what else is going to happen besides Lucky Charms to kids?
Yep. Well, that's going on in where we just left, of course, but with print media and these newspapers, many of them have tried or are still trying to solve for this, I guess, conflict or dilemma, which is, how much should we still build around an advertising future versus a subscription future? And the truth is, most of them cannot make it on subscription alone. And so they're left in the middle, and it's a tough spot because otherwise you'll have the New York Times, the Washington Post, and a handful of other local papers actually becoming global papers, and that's where everybody gets their news from, because these smaller metros just couldn't get there on a subscription model, which is why I think you have to try to maintain a hybrid.
Yeah. Well, there are some new platforms out there like Substack that's testing that theory about like, oh, I could sign up for like a more custom newsletter for $5 a month. And obviously like the Patreons of the world and things where you're more like supporting the individual artist. Now, I don't think people see like the local newspapers as something that most people, I don't think, see it as something that they want to like, or that they as I need to support the Denver Post, otherwise it's not going to make it, right? But when you think of the individual artist or writer, I forget who the big sports guy at the Post was, Reid, but it's like, those individuals building their following could more likely support something.
Woody Page, yeah.
Yeah, Woody.
Funny enough, I forget what the platform was, but it wasn't very successful because I had gone to Mac, the former CEO at the Post, and said we should look at a Spotify model with our journalists, because somebody like a Woody, to your point, would get probably a lot more traction and attention if it was at an individual level versus supporting the whole enterprise. He got super fascinated by it, but then he was like, you know what? I think there was, and this just gets to maybe execution, back to first to market, David, versus being second to market. But whoever had tried that model was grossly inadequate, I'll say, or maybe people weren't ready for it. But I'd be fascinated to see it get picked back up and somebody be successful with content on a Spotify type, with a Spotify type model.
So Substack is the one to look at. They kind of made it popular in the tech circles, and then they had certain tech journalists that they were paying, that they are currently paying $500,000 a year to like come over there. So they're venture funded. I don't know, in the tens of millions of dollars, and they can afford to say, hey, tech journalists, like you write for whatever download.com, come over here. We'll help you build your audience. We're going to pay you an enormous amount, $500K. An annual salary, and then we're going to have people sign up for you individually at like $1 to $5 a month. The problem that Substack has had so far is that people go to Substack, take that salary, use Substack's reach, but Substack doesn't own like the email addresses or anything. So after a year, that person has built up 1 million followers and is like, great, emails their entire list and then bounces to their own like technology backend platform. Because if you had $1 million paying $1, now you own the audience. So they're kind of that's kind of the issue right now. Is it's the chicken and the egg. But where nobody's going to sign away their rights to be a journalist if they decide to break, like, after their contract not renew with Substack, right? So if you don't renew and then you take your audience, that's a problem. But then if Substack says you can't see your audience members, no journalist is going to want that either. Like, oh, I'm going to give up the email address to this list that I've built. No way. That then now I'm hostage and I definitely can't go anywhere else. So there's some folks trying, but still more to do. Well, I feel like I tried to wrap up 10 minutes ago, but I enjoy the conversation. Is there anything else we want to hit, or do we,
No, I'm good.
I think so.
We'll take mercy on our listeners.
I think we'll be at 15 by after this
podcast. Well, Adam, we can't wait for the next debut of your tinfoil hat. I hope it's sooner than later.
I'll have to save it.
So definitely raise your hand when you're ready for the next contrarian view.
We'll start selling sponsorships to my tinfoil hat. If someone wants to pay us, I'll put a sticker on my hat, whoever it is.
You're gonna be like Poker Stars or something next time that you're on here. Your hat will have branding
like
on it.
NASCAR hat. Yep.
Start talking red share.
All right, guys. Well,
all right.
Thanks, and we'll see you guys next time.